Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. Hey friends, have any of you guys ever thought about what it would be like to discover a body? And I'm not talking about, finding a loved one deceased, having passed away in their sleep, because that's happened with great frequency. What does not happen, though, is that individuals on a regular basis come across a decedent on the side of the street, in the woods, maybe in an old abandoned house. But let's take it up another notch. What if you found a body, and that body was found in a rather open area behind a rather well-known establishment in a town, and that body was absent both its head and hands? Today we're going to talk about one such case, a case that has gone on forever and ever, and now we have a resolution about the identification of a headless and handless corpse. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave, there are levels to terror and levels to horrific things that are seen, right? We've talked about our share on the show, but you and I, we don't stumble into the back of a building, into a parking lot, and actually bear witness to something like this. Can you imagine what it would have been like for the finder to step out into this location and find the body of a subject that was absent both hands and head?
Think about it. That's when I'm looking at this, Joe, that's what I'm thinking. Okay, it's one thing to find a body. That not like that happens to everybody every day, but at least a full body that has passed away in there. This has no head and hands. This is a body that has been abused. This is a body that's been hacked up, and absent the head and hands, I'm thinking this is some kind of a Nightmare on Elm Street story we're going to have a movie about or something. And in this particular case, I thought it was, I had a different feeling when I started than when I finished. And to be honest with you, Joe, there is still so much more that needs to be investigated, because I believe this is a case that there was somebody arrested early on, okay, in the actual murder, but it was the identity of the victim, because the killer admitted to killing, but didn't know the name of the person he killed. What's even worse, Joseph Scott Morgan, this victim was a teenager. What's worse than that? Human trafficking. So this story has multiple levels of evil, and every step along the way, you know what I'm hit with? The family. The 16-year-old's family, and how their hearts had to have been breaking for 25 plus years.
Yeah,
it goes beyond.
Yeah, it really does. The thing about it is, and this is actually up in Chelsea, Mass, you think about a body being found, and it's actually found, interestingly enough, behind a building it was actually the disabled veterans home in Chelsea, Massachusetts. An interesting
parking lot. In the parking lot, Joe.
Just dumped and tossed aside. Things have gone on for so long with this case. We don't, back in 2000 is when, and like you said, this is, we're 25 years downrange from where the body was actually found. And can you imagine, you're in a veteran's retirement home, and everything you've seen as a veteran, throughout your life, and there, before you, out there adjacent to where you're living now, um, there's this young girl's body found there. And Dave, this strikes me as if someone did this, they would probably have to know how to access the rear of this building. They'd have to be familiar with it,
Mhm.
because I can't imagine they're just driving down the road and they say, "Hey, there's the disabled veterans home," and then they whip around back and do this. They've probably seen this area before. What do you think?
Yeah, you're dead on right, Joe. And I was looking at when this all went down, and we're talking November of 2000. Okay, um, it's behind the veterans home and in the parking lot, and you're talking about a cold time. We're in the Northeast, for crying out loud. It's
Yeah.
cold. And so, yeah, whoever was putting this body there knew where they were putting it. They were getting it. It was almost like, let me get this out of sight, but where it can be found. There was that kind of thought because it wasn't hidden. Like I'm putting the remains away so that they'll never be found. But the killer on all this, Joe, or the kicker, there was surveillance footage. The investigation early on had a suspect early on, but they couldn't identify the victim. And that's not usually the way this goes for us. I mean, we have victims that go, unidentified, but that usually comes hand in hand with a suspect who's never caught either. In
Yes.
this case, in this case, Joe, they had the suspect caught on video, saw this person having this wrapped body and leaving it in the back of this parking lot, in back of the veterans home, and leaving. They know who this person is. So they're able to bait this individual enough. And of course, at first he denied, I don't know what you're talking about. But they got video and they're identifying him. Thing is, it's a guy who lives at the local YMCA, for crying out loud, Joe.
Yeah.
And they're able to find out. When I say they, I'm talking about the investigators. The investigators are able to identify the suspect, and the suspect admits what he has done. He claims to have taken a woman back to his room at the YMCA. Again, this is in 2000. I didn't even know the YMCA still rented rooms out, in 2000. I don't know if they still do. Maybe they do. But
Yeah, in Atlanta, they certainly did.
okay.
There was a big YMCA there, and also, believe it or not, there was people aren't aware of this. They hear a lot about Salvation Army, particularly around Christmas
Right.
time. There's a big Salvation Army. There used to be a Salvation Army hotel slash apartment
Mhm.
complex in
Right.
Atlanta too, that I had to work cases out of. Imagine that.
Wow.
But yeah, this is, but the fact that he's there at the YMCA and he's brought her
Right.
to this location in and of itself is fascinating. But I think one of my questions, anytime I have a body where you're missing a head, the hands to a lesser degree,
Hmm.
but you're missing the head, there's two things I think about. I'm thinking they're either taking a trophy, all right,
Wow.
something that they want to
Hold
hold
on a
on
minute.
to that they can.
The head? Now I can see that with hands, Joe, but really with a head, people keep heads as trophies?
Yeah, I mean,
Oh my God.
all you got to do is look at
Ugh.
Dahmer. Dahmer did this, and
Oh,
you can render down a head, and just have a skull, which I think Dahmer had, and he's not the first person to have done this. It's
is
almost
this where
like,
there's things like a Spencer's Gifts that have like a candle in the skull that comes from like, oh my gosh,
yeah, I
man.
know. Hang on
Oh,
one second.
that's
I've actually,
no, you don't.
like that.
Ah, yes.
That's actually a candle.
Oh,
But yeah. So, but no, this is full
only
size
you would
skull.
have
And
that
they're
in the studio as we're doing this.
well,
Wait,
I don't just
excuse
have
me, I
that
have
one.
a
My sister-in-law actually gave me this coffee mug too. So
that's a
there you go. So yeah, so go figure, right? But yeah, when I'm always thinking, if you've got a skeletal remain, or you've got a human remain that's missing a head in particular, one of two things: either they're taking a trophy, or the head has some kind of information. Okay, I know that's a rather broad statement there, but if you think about, has there been some type of injury that has occurred that could tie an individual back to the event that led to their death? Like, is there anything like ballistic evidence, right? Because it's one thing to think about shooting somebody and taking their life, but most people are not going to take the time to shoot somebody and then dig the bullet out of the skull and retrieve it.
Right.
It's easier externally
Okay. Now,
to take the head off. The head is probably, I would say, the head is probably the easiest thing to detach from the body, other than individual digits of
mhm,
fingers. But even they can present trouble, cut at the knuckles. But the head
right.
itself is something that's rather easy to do. I've had to do this multiple times over the course of my career in the morgue, where we have partial skeletal remains. It still has soft tissue, but we have to remove the head in order to render down that tissue to get rid of it so they can do facial reconstructions. Yeah, I think a lot of folks believe that, in our world in forensics, that when we have a skeletal remain they're going to do a facial reconstruction on, that these bones are perfectly clean, and that's just not the case. And sometimes, we have to do this, but I can tell you, as a fact, that it is quite easy to take off a human head.
That I've never actually thought about it. Jenny, I'm not a psycho killer, so no, I haven't really thought about it. Would this be difficult or easy? But here are a couple of the things that everybody needs to know as we go through this case. One, we have an unidentified victim. She is found wrapped in a blanket back of a public parking lot behind a veteran's home. Her head and hands have been chopped off. And by the way, according to the report I saw from the police, her body was also cut in half.
Yep.
Now, that adds to the the mess that
Mm.
this individual, the suspect, would have gone through in rendering to do this. I mean, this is not without our the blood and the body fluids. I mean, there had this body had to have been cut up someplace where there would be some leftover remnant of what took place. Correct? I mean, at a YMCA, where do you go to do this?
Well, if you don't have a shared bathroom, I guess you could do it in your own personal bathroom. Because the one thing I've said consistently over our years together, Dave, about dismemberment is, first off, you have to have equipment.
Right.
Uh, you have to have privacy. You have to have, many times, depending upon the instrument you're using, unless you're using a manual saw, you have to have some kind of source of electricity, and then you have to have the ability to clean. Okay. Now, I've been inside of YMCA places to interview folks, and lots of times there is a common shower, right?
Right.
So it's like everybody gets together. You got shower time, right? It's kind of like in the military, the way the military used to be. But where you got a single head sticking, multiple heads sticking out of a single pole in the middle of the floor, and everybody gathers around. You're not
Okay.
going to take a
Sorry.
body in there and
You
dismember the
have me
body
doing a
there.
visual. I'm seeing heads of human heads, not heads of showers, human heads. I was like,
Right. Yeah.
where are you going today,
Yeah,
Joe?
I'm talking about shower heads. So
Uh,
yeah, generally there's a common area, and traditionally there has been, but maybe in this case there's a private bathroom where this could be facilitated, because you do in fact need privacy and you need time. Most people that enter into this type of event don't have a tremendous amount of experience with it, and so they it's very easy to get caught up in the particulars as it applies to, where do I make the first incision, and then once they've made the first incision, what do I do with the body? This is interesting though, because if you've got this young woman's remains that have been essentially bisected. That
mhm.
means cut across the midline, transversely, as we call it, right? Um, it it presents an interesting scenario, because that gets very, very messy. We're not talking about hands, and we're not talking about heads now. Okay, we're talking about going across the viscera. So you've got all of the internal organs. You've got the bowel, which people don't understand how very, very messy that is. And then all of a sudden, you're in the middle of something you can't handle. How does someone get a body into the YMCA? Well, if they have gone up there for the purposes of illicit activity, then you understand that the individual goes up under their own power. And then, at that point in time, something goes wrong and you end that person's life. But to go to this degree, again, you begin to think, well, is it possible that the individual took this body apart and piece by piece brought that body down in a manageable size until they could put as much distance between themselves and the body? But as you know, science will always catch up. This is such an odd set of circumstances. You're telling me that we have a suspect in this case, but we don't have an identification on the decedent. That
Right.
You got to admit that's kind of bizarre.
I don't recall us having one before, but
No.
this is odd. And the thing is, the suspect here, I'm gonna give you the guy's name. It's Eugene McCollum. Now, Eugene McCollum admitted to killing our victim. And police like, well, who was she? What was her name? Where was she from? Give us details. And he goes, I don't know. I think her name was Lisa. I'm not even sure of that. And that's why, Joe, this started in November of 2000. And to their credit, law enforcement, they knew somebody was looking for this victim. Some family member knows that their family member is missing and they don't know where she is. I mean, they knew that. And so even though they had a suspect, he confesses and he is in prison for this murder. They don't give up. They're still trying to identify this victim. She was later called the Chelsea Jane Doe or Lisa Jane Doe, Chelsea, something along those lines. But they were kind of not wanting to say Lisa because they thought that might be a made up name anyway. And they didn't want to, the investigators were trying to be classy about this, or
As well it should, well it should be, because all it takes. That's why I don't like the terms Jane and John Doe,
right?
Because there are people with those names out there, but also it gives a particular name, and even if you're not doing it consciously, it kind of roots into your subconscious. If you apply Lisa to this, then by virtue of that, you're going with what this person says,
right?
The perpetrator, and all of a sudden you're predisposed to look at only Lisas, right?
Yeah.
So you got to be kind of broad-minded about this, Dave.
I think you're right, and I think that's where the investigators were careful. Here's how they got it up. Now, remember how I said that surveillance video showed the suspect dropping the remains in the parking lot? Investigators were able to identify the person, Eugene McCollum. And so once they had their suspect, they went about doing some serious police work. Police got McCollum they got his DNA from a soda bottle that he touched in front of a police officer. Think about that for a minute. Chances are they're talking to him. Hey, man, what do you know about this? Do you know anything? We're just interviewing everybody here at the Y. They get his DNA from the soda bottle. They're able to match that DNA with DNA found on the victim. And with that, now McCollum put up an argument at first, until he said, okay, dude, we matched your DNA with what was on the victim. Okay, I did it. Now, They get the admission. He did it. He tells them that he picks this girl up. They go back to his room at the YMCA. They have an argument over money. He strangles her and then cuts her up. He cuts her head off, cuts her hands, and he put her hand and hands in a container. And Joe, Eugene McCollum told two different stories about
Yeah.
where the head and hands were. At first, he tells police that he put the head and the hands in a dumpster out back of the Y. Well, you know how that works. They can track the dumpster when it was picked up, where the dumpster went. I mean, they know all of this. They proved that he didn't do that. So they went back to him and he claimed that he actually took the head and hands and buried them on a beach. And believe it or not, he wasn't lying, Joe. 3 years after her body was found, her head and hands were found. Now, when I first started investigating this, Joe, I thought that the head and hands were just arbitrarily found by somebody at the beach with their family. No, the investigation began with what Eugene McCollum told them finally about what he did, and then they followed his directions that led to the head and the hands. But even having the head and the hands, they could not get an identification done, Joe. Investigators tried
Yeah.
to do the pictures, the drawings, of what this person may have looked like, and they just could not come up with any no identification.
Yeah, very difficult to do. And also, I think that we didn't have the technology. Now, even though this is 2004, now we have to back up. Remember, this homicide took place in 2000,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And we can go through, the total examination of the remains, how they were treated. It could be difficult to find trauma on the neck, depending upon at what level the dissection took place. On the head, to remove the head, if it's very, very low, okay, at the
Hmm.
level of, say, the shoulders, right,
Right.
then with that head is going to come the neck. All right, kind of logical, right?
Yeah.
Well, that eradicates this evidence. Remember how I was talking about gunshot wounds to the head,
Yeah.
and people get rid of heads because they don't want to dig out bullets
Right.
or projectiles. But even this, if you go really, really low right here, and you remove, now, if you're talking about this high, say superior to the little cartilaginous
Hmm.
bodies in the neck, think Adam's apple right here,
Okay.
superior to that, then you might find hemorrhage here. Um, but if you take low down to the layer of the shoulders, or, if you want to say the collarbone, clavicle, bilaterally here, you're going to remove that evidence. Isn't that kind of fascinating? And then you take that,
Wow.
that element along with the hands. Now, he said that this is what was fascinating to me because I didn't understand this part of it.
Hmm.
How many times have you been to the beach, right?
Right.
And over the years, and I got to tell you, you go to the beach, man, windswept, tides rising and falling. There's certain times at the beach where it's like everything looks the same, particularly if you're
Yeah.
not from around these parts, and
Yeah.
you just look at it, it all looks the same. It's glorious. I love being at the beach. Matter of fact, I'd rather be at the beach right now, I think. But not really. I want to do body bags. But um, I when you go there, you have to have some marker. So I'm wondering what you're saying about him, where he revealed the truth. He actually put the hands and the head in a container and went to a specific area at the beach and
Right.
buried it, correct?
So much, and was so specific. Now, I don't know how many times they went out there, and looked, but yeah, it was in one. He named the place to go where he had buried the head and the hands, and when you go to a beach area, and they're all a little bit different, but in some you have hotels built right on the water, in others you have homes, and in other beach areas, you have areas that are off the beach, past the dunes, and you have the sea grass and things like that. I'm guessing that we're talking varying off the beach area. I'm not,
Mm.
yeah, but again, I don't know. All I know is that the police had the suspect convicted, sentenced. They had all that done and still did not know the victim's name. But what they did know is that Eugene McCollum told police, Joe, that he was a ticking time bomb because his brother was murdered and the killer got away. That the killer beat the case in court. And because of that, McCollum never had any belief in the justice system, and so he was kind of a one-man war with justice. I don't know. But that's what he claimed was his rationale and what caused him to flip a switch. Joe, his brother was killed in 1996, and the killer, or the alleged killer, was not convicted. So I don't know who killed, you know what I mean? I don't know what transpired there, but in Eugene McCollum's mind, the killer got away with murder. And so all bets are off. And while he was awaiting trial for the murder of the unidentified female, while he's waiting trial, another headless body is being investigated. And it comes back. He did that one too, Joe. And so I was tracking all this back because I'm like, wait a minute. While awaiting trial in the Lisa Jane Doe murder, McCollum pleaded guilty to manslaughter and was sentenced to 10 to 12 years in prison before he went on trial for the Lisa case. So the unidentified female victim murder is going through the investigative process. He's awaiting trial. And police come up with this other murder of a guy named Jackie Lydon. Now, Jackie Lydon was found in a rundown apartment by his brother. And the reason this is important, Jackie Lydon's brother finds him, and it's in East Boston, okay? That's the area we're dealing with here in Boston, which is, by the way, I should have mentioned this earlier, Joe. Eugene McCollum claims that he picked up Lisa in Boston and brought her back to the Y, okay, to his room at the Y. In this other case of Jackie Lydon, it was in East Boston. It was a 2001 murder, and the decomposed, decapitated body was found by Jackie's brother, who was then arrested for the murder. And now the brother, this is why, when you started making me think about the finder, and I started going back through all these different cases where the finder was the suspect, was the person who did it. That was my first thought is, okay, what did they, brothers are going to have a lot of things in common oftentimes, and they would have a lot of crossing. And but anyway, so McCollum ends up confessing to the murder of Jackie Lydon. He tells police that he beat him to death, bludgeoned Lydon to death, and then cut off his head. And McCollum told police he took the head to Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
From Massachusetts.
Yes. All I could picture was the story you told about carrying the body next to you. The head next to you.
Yeah, to LSU. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, so is that what he did? He put the head in a little box or a little cooler?
He's living in a YMCA. I'm thinking, what's he do? Is it like Midnight Cowboy where he's on the back of the bus and they're heading to sunnier? I don't know.
Maybe.
He's got the head under his arm and he's going to Fort Lauderdale. But I'd be doggone, Dave, in this particular case, he wasn't lying.
No,
they actually went. Fort Lauderdale police or the authorities down there, they went and recovered this head. This guy transported from Massachusetts all the way down there. I don't know about you, man. I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but I kind of see a pattern developing here. What say you?
Oh my gosh, Joe.
Yeah.
This is so crazy, that while he's awaiting trial, this all comes up. So in between the time that he allegedly kills our unknown victim in November of 2000, he then gets into a brouhaha with Jackie Lydon and kills him, chops his... Now, this is the second person in a matter of months that he has killed and then chopped the head off. So, yeah, I think you're onto something there. So while he still hasn't gone to trial on the person they haven't identified yet. And he takes a plea deal and claims, I think he pleaded guilty to manslaughter. And they sentence him to 10 to 12 years in prison. So I don't know all of the circumstances because, to be honest with you, I was freaking out that the same guy cut heads off of two people. And by the way, there might be more.
Yeah,
I
I think that look, if I were a betting man, I'd probably say he's got a taste for it.
yeah.
And I know that sounds very Hollywood, but look, it's like anything else. You know, an individual begins to develop skill set, and you know, this is rather gruesome skill set to possess. But you know, McCollum is all fine, and we know that he's rolled over and confessed and
Hmm.
been convicted.
Right.
But the problem we have is there's still an unidentified victim, and guess what? Turns out she's a rather young, unidentified victim. Well, Dave, we're going to take a journey all the way from Massachusetts in the back of that building to a place that you and I have become very familiar with, and that's going to be the
Oh,
Woodlands, Texas here,
yeah, buddy.
because we've got this apparently young woman who has been, I mean, we could literally say she's been butchered.
Yeah.
Okay. People use that term. I don't really think they know what that means. You know, when you
Hmm.
hear butchered, butchered means that you're set about a task of dismantling a body in a very systematic way. Okay. Taking it apart piece by piece. All right. Like a butcher would. She's been butchered. And the fact, I think one of the interesting things, Dave, is that the fact that you've got the body, the torso that is found in this particular case, and then 3, 4 years later, you have the head and the hands turn up,
Hmm.
and still they can't get an ID off of her, Dave. And I'm sure that for the police, is very, very frustrating stuff.
I couldn't figure out how, you've got the entire body, but again, you know, I think sometimes we assume things are different than they are. It's not as easy as it appears because think about the number of people who go missing every single day in the United States of America. There are a lot. You will be shocked. You would truly be shocked if you actually looked up the raw numbers.
Yeah,
But in this case, you mentioned the Woodlands, and this is where I have so much respect for investigators because they didn't give up. They could have. They could have walked away from this, Joe. They didn't spend time on it. They have a conviction. They have a person serving time for this murder that occurred in 2000.
yeah,
Now you're at the time it's 2023, okay? We're talking 23 years later. You could you've got other things to work. You got other things to do. These investigators didn't. They said, yeah, we are finding this because again it goes back to this is somebody's daughter. This is somebody's sister, somebody's, aunt, mom, even. And so they kept working. And that's where they brought in the team from Othram. And Joe, we've mentioned this before. Othram, they have to crowdfund.
yep,
The shocking thing about this for me is I didn't know that. I assumed that there was investors. We hear about money getting thrown around by all kinds of groups for political purposes, and it's always in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And
yeah,
I just assumed that there was a vat of money paying for this. Uh, Author has to crowdfund.
yep,
They've got plenty of work waiting to be done, but they really can't start until they hit a $7,500 mark, and then they can start working. And this is why, Joe, and I tell you, if you ever wanted to be involved in finding a solution to a crime, maybe it's one in your area. Think about what
yep,
they did here.
yeah,
This is a case out of Massachusetts that was solved because the investigators never gave up. They met with the folks from Othram, and Joe, it takes time, but they were able to put things together and
yeah,
build out a family tree.
yeah. They were, and it's interesting, and we're going to tell you, you know, who this young lady is. It is a rather circuitous route relative to this journey, this case, if you will. You know, we're down in the Woodlands. They've discovered who she is, Dave. And interestingly enough, we go back up north, but not this time to Massachusetts. We go now to Pennsylvania, Dave.
Yeah.
The ID on
Ugh.
this young woman, and she's young,
Mm.
um, she's a missing child.
Oh my gosh.
out of Pennsylvania. Dave, 16 years old.
Yeah.
16 years old. She's over 300 miles away from where her family lives in Pennsylvania, all the way over in Massachusetts. And I guess the big question is, how does she wind up there?
Okay.
Because, yeah, go
This
ahead.
is where, remember when we first started, I mentioned human trafficking.
Yeah.
I'm not dancing around this here, okay? This 16-year-old high school student playing in the band, ROTC, the bubbly, fun person in the family who everybody looks at. Her name was Tiffany Bradley. Tiffany Bradley was 16 years old. 16. She was reported missing November 8th, 2000. Do you remember the day we said the body was found? November 13, 2000. And Joe, one thing we do know is that after Tiffany was murdered in that YMCA room, she wasn't dumped immediately. She was dumped 2 days after her murder. She's found on the 13th. That means, talk back, she was killed on the night of the 10th or the 11th. She was reported missing November 8th. How does a 16-year-old girl from Allentown, Pennsylvania, end up 300 miles away and dead 3 days after she's reported missing? The shocker.
Yeah, it really is. And the family
Oh,
has stated that they believe that this is a direct result of human trafficking.
yeah. Yeah.
Um, and wow, I mean, what a case to kind of hammer that point home.
Snatched.
That there is a, and it, I fail miserably to try to explain how extensive this problem is.
Oh.
I think that people just blow it off and say, nah, it's not a problem.
It seems so unlikely, Joe. It
Yeah.
seems like, how is
It
this even
ain't.
possible?
It ain't.
There are
It,
super highways in every state where young
yeah.
girls are taken.
Yeah.
They're not all marginalized people either. We're not talking about people living on the edge of society. In this
No.
case, a 16-year-old ROTC, active in school with a family who loves her, Joe.
Yep.
And she was snatched.
All these years later, can you imagine? I don't want to, but the pain that this family has gone through. Here you are with this beautiful child, Tiffany, and you're watching her grow in her high school experience. She's edging ever closer and closer to walking across that stage and getting that diploma and going on with her life to college or wherever it was that she was going to go in the end. And suddenly, I want all the parents to hear me say this. Suddenly, she just into thin air. She just vanishes.
Yeah.
I don't know that we could, really measure the depths of sorrow here and confusion and hopelessness and anger and frustration that the family would have to go through. There is, if you're looking for a happy ending here, my friends, there is not a happy ending. Okay. Don't try to color this or whitewash it in any other way. There is no happy ending. However, I will tell you this. There are, in fact, answers. And one of the ways that we glean these answers now is through forensic genetic genealogy. This case could have gone on and on for decades and maybe just put back into a file and on a dusty shelf somewhere, and it would have been forgotten. But because of the work that the police did, that they stayed on this, and because of the work that our friends at Othram did, these family members now have answers to what happened to Tiffany. Now, I can tell you this. Somewhere near you, if you're in the States, there is a case involving a missing person or a person that is unidentified, okay? You now have the ability to become that thing which many of you wish that you could become, and that is, to a certain degree, an investigator, or at least funding investigations, and you know where your money's going to go. It's not going to be some governmental agency taking it and then pushing it towards something else other than what they promised. This is an organization, Othram, that will take those dollar bills that you send, or whatever it is that you can send to fund them, send it to them, and they can begin to work these cases. $7,500 flips the switch on it. If they can get that amount of money, they work the case and they build out a profile and they get answers. The proof is in the pudding. You don't believe me? Go visit their website. It's DNAsolves.com, and you will see case after case after case after case that has been solved. You'll see cases there that are still currently being worked on that need more money. You choose the one you want to. You can push your money toward that. And in the end, they might come up with answers that, just like with Tiffany's family, they can say, this is your precious baby. We're sorry, but this is her, and we have gotten her identified. At least they can move on from that point in their life where they were wondering, will we ever have an answer? Well, now they do. You can help with that. And again, I urge each and every one of you to visit DNAsolves.com. That's DNAsolves.com, and help families out there get the answers that they're so longing to have. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bag.